to Daniel. I'll just make you host so you can drive. And we will get started.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, Mark, and thanks for everyone for checking in. Yeah, it's a pleasure to speak to you guys today. I guess I just want to preface things by saying that I guess I'm not pushing one side of style of hockey over another. I was essentially a researcher in this instance, but I also do work for Wesley College, which is part of the Public Schools Association. So we, about 2 years ago, flagged some changes at year 5 and 6 sport level, and we ended up having a conference and bringing a bunch of sports, particularly community sports, that were the same as ours. So soccer, football, rugby, hockey, cricket. We brought all of those in and engaged with, I guess, the community sport level, and we decided to make some changes to our, or some modifications to our sport. So yeah, like I said, I'm not really here to say you need to go and do this and this. I'm just here to present what we did and why we did it, and what we found from it. And I guess a little bit on my background. So I am, I guess I would say, more of a sports scientist, strength and conditioning coach by trade. So I completed my PhD a few years ago, and worked in academia for a bit. I worked in elite sport for about 9 or 10 years, and was lucky enough to have a stint with the Kookaburras leading into the London Olympics, and was lucky enough to, and my current boss, as he's pointed out, who's on leave for a year, he's brought me into Wesley College into this role as assistant head of sport and physical performance manager. So I kind of look at all ends of the spectrum, from elite athletes in the school, and then also spend a significant amount of time with kids playing sport and engaging in sport and getting better at moving. So essentially, we want the best. We want to give them the best platform to develop their skills and literacy in sport, just as much as any other, say, class like maths or English or sciences. So, so that sort of got us going with this study. So, because I thought there was a significant need in hockey, because a lot of other sports had made some modifications recently based on some evidence, I engaged with one of our current prac students to complete her honours project with us the following year. So that's Sarah Henley Martin. So I just want to give her a bit of credit for this. She did a lot of the work, and I really facilitated and gave her the ideas and just guided her along the way, along with Dr. Kagan Ducker and Dr. Carly Braid. So the title of our project was Perceptual, Physiological and Performance Comparisons of Traditional and Small-Sided Games in Youth Hockey. Okay, so this was the year 5 and 6 level at school. So, so 10, 11 to 12-year-olds we're looking at in this space. Now, fortunately, we struggled to get this video going with the audio. Mark will probably send a link. I'll get the link sent out and Mark can forward that on. This was a great video that started our conference 18 months ago. And basically, this was, I guess, advocating change for soccer, which in a sense is a similar to sport to hockey, with the number of players on the field size, and similar to how quick the ball moves as well. So basically, in this video, they decided to actually set up a field for adults, the similar sort of relative dimensions that 11-year-old kids are playing soccer on, basically being on a full-size pitch. So they set up a huge pitch with massive goals, and then they basically had these soccer coaches playing soccer on this gigantic pitch to sort of show them what it was like to play on something that big. So this really set the tone for our conference, and what we decided to do is make some adjustments to how we played hockey, but we also wanted to get some data on what that looked like. So we wanted to compare that to our traditional format, which was 11 aside, full field, kind of like the adult version of the game. So I'll try not to use too much technical jargon, but we used what was called a repeated measures crossover design. So the way it simply worked was our year 5, 6A hockey team, when we would play a home fixture against another PSA school, we would play on a full pitch, 11 aside. Okay.
I'm looking at Mac, but the Mac is...
And then when we play on an away fixture, we would play cross field, so half pitch, and we would play 7-a-side. Okay. We actually kept the size of the D the exact same as a traditional field to, I guess, allow for more opportunities for shots on goal and things like that. So it's a little bit more attacking, and I'll show you some of the data shortly. So we ended up having 16 kids in our A squad. So there was 15 males and 1 female because we are co-ed until year 6. And so there's their age and some of their height and weight data. We had 4 traditional games. So that was 4 games at home at Wesley. And then there was four fixtures we played away. And basically the reason there's N equals 8 is because we split our squad of roughly 15, and this included goalkeepers, by the way, in both formats. We split our squad to play 2 small-sided games, so 2 7-a-side games against the other school. So that's why there's a sample of 8 games there. Okay. So what we collected was every child who was participating in the study, they wore a heart rate monitor, which was linked up to a GPS unit. So that gave us some information on how hard they were working, how far they were running, the intensity of their running, and yeah, so it gave us some of that data. We also videoed every single game and collected possession data for players, shots on, so basically how many times each player got to touch the ball and have control of the ball, how many shots there were on goal, the amount of goals scored, the penalty corners, and number of times in the circle. Now, this is just for Wesley students. We didn't collect the statistical data for any of the other schools. We just wanted to look at how hard our kids were working internally, what their external output was with their running, and then what they were getting out of it. And just to give you a bit of a background, our A hockey team was probably a middle tier. So we weren't one of the top schools, but we also managed to have a win in some of our fixtures as well. Also, we wanted to know how the kids found it. So we wanted to know how much they enjoyed each type of format. So the traditional format, 11-a-side, and the small-sided format, 7-a-side across field, and how hard they found the session. So a rating of perceived exertion as well. We're trying not to go through too much data, I guess. What's quite interesting here is, so we have our traditional games at the top and our small-sided games next to it here. So the mean rating of perceived exertion, so how hard they thought this session was pretty much the same. Okay, so they thought they were working equally hard in both formats. Now the training load here is basically their session rating of perceived exertion multiplied by the amount of time they had on the pitch. Now we were lucky in that, so our squad was roughly 15 kids. So in an 11-side format, we typically have 3 kids. If someone was away, we typically have 3 kids on the sideline. So the reason their total training load was lower was because they had slightly less game time. And then in the small-sided game, pretty much every kid was on for the whole time. So that was fantastic. So that's probably why the training load's a bit higher, because of the amount of time on the pitch. The average heart rate for the whole game was basically the same, so 157 beats per minute versus 156. So and similar maximum heart rates as well. So working just as hard in both formats. If we look at total distance covered in the formats, their total distance was very similar. Now, because there was slightly greater time on pitch in the small-sided games, their running intensity was lower than the traditional games. And the reason I'd say that is because in the traditional format, there's a little bit more space to run in. So you're more likely to cover more distance because you have to. Whereas in the small-sided game, they still covered a reasonable amount of distance, but they probably didn't get up to the same sort of speed and didn't have quite as much room to move. But as you'll see in the next slide, that meant they actually had quite a lot of the ball. So with our performance data, so basically our game statistics, looking at the video data, The shots on goal, we had a significant difference. So I think it was something like just under 6 shots on goal per game in the traditional format. And then it was about 24 or 25 shots on goal per game in the small-sided format. The amount of times in the circle was significantly different as well. And the number of possessions per player was also greater in the small-sided format compared to the traditional format. Can anyone else see these love hearts on the screen? I have no idea why they are
Daniel,
on there.
I think someone may have accidentally typed it incorrectly, so we'll lock all privileges for the next time. But we'll just
that's okay.
We'll
I'm glad.
Plow on.
I'm glad they liked the slide.
Yeah. Just on this moment as well, what we'll do is on the bottom of your screen in the Zoom page, there's actually a chat function. If you guys at any stage throughout the talk have a question, please feel free just to type it. And then on that slide or the slide after, we can actually raise that discussion there because it's an appropriate time to discuss it. So you're more than welcome to type something in. But yeah, the owner of the love hearts, if they're more than welcome to remove them if they know how to.
We'll carry on. It's not too distracting. Now, one thing I also will say before I move on with any of this data is, now this is looking at, so if we think about the group of kids that were playing, so in the traditional format, we had the whole A squad. So this is the number of shots on goal for the whole A squad for that fixture, as well as times in the circle and number of possessions per player. Now, what has actually happened is because we've split this squad and we've got 2 games going, we've essentially got the same number of kids that have obviously, as you can see in the data, have a significantly greater amount of opportunities to score goals, or I guess also defend goals. But you can almost double this. So if you think about those players, and we can double the data, that same number of players is having a huge exposure to shots on goal, times in the circle, and number of times on the ball. In terms of goals, there was I think we averaged about half a goal a game on average in the traditional format, so really struggled to get a goal, and then upwards of 4 goals a game in the small-sided format. Also, the opportunity to practice penalty corners was much greater in the small-sided format, just because it was much quicker to move the ball into the D, which allowed defenders the opportunity to practice some of their defensive skills and strategy, but also made for more mistakes in that area as well. So there's some more opportunities for penalty corners. In terms of enjoyment, now the scale that we use is called a paces scale. Now these results here are very similar. So they enjoyed both formats. Now there's probably a couple of reasons for this. These numbers are actually saying that these guys really enjoyed playing hockey. And it's probably not totally unexpected when you have an A hockey squad. So the top hockey players who selected hockey as one of their sport options. So they're probably naturally inclined to already enjoy hockey, which is why they selected it. We also think that there might be some sensitivity issues with the scale. So that's probably a reason behind that data. But overall, they didn't enjoy it less by moving to a small-sided format. Very practically, we think that the modification of Year 5 and 6 hockey is a very simple way to promote greater opportunities to touch the ball, to move the ball into the circle and be attacking. But also with that comes more and more opportunities for goalkeepers and defenders. And the goalkeepers was the big one. So Asst, our director of hockey, is also the Thundersticks head coach. He really pushed us to format the rules in a way, or modify the rules in a way where we kept keepers, whereas other sports are moving away from those sorts of positions because there's, I guess, they're lacking in some of the higher grades, the number of people who are exposed to being a goalkeeper. And I don't blame them, because if you're facing 3 shots a game across close to 60 minutes, that's pretty boring. And just from watching, goalkeepers who were not in the play are sitting on the back of the goals. And to me, that's not really, that's not playing sport. So with the increased opportunities that each child had there was no goalkeeper sitting down at any moment in this hockey format. So that was fantastic to see, and that would probably increase engagement of goalkeepers or kids that want to try that position because of the potentially, and I can't say based on our data, but potentially could be more enjoyable because of the opportunities that come from that. So guys, I'll stop sharing my screen now, and I'll head over here. So that was my talk. That was a presentation of the data. Now I'm sure there might be some questions, and Mark is probably collecting some of those questions. So feel free to ask away. But also, when Mark and I had a chat before, this is probably a great chance to hear what a bunch of great coaches at all different levels have to say about maybe looking at this as a model for obviously training. It could give you some great insight into what you might see in training, but whether that's something you might look at in terms of competition as well.
So, so thanks for the presentation, Daniel. What I might ask you to do, despite it being with no sound, I might ask you to flick the video up if that's possible.
Yes.
So you can gauge a scale of the difference, as it's a really good example of how basically small-sided games and what we don't realise for giving full numbers for younger athletes.
Mark, I can probably commentate through this a little bit because I've watched it a few times now. So let's see. So like I said, this is a bunch of 11-year-olds when they move to a full-size pitch, 11 on 11, and basically showing that goalkeepers really struggle because of the size of the goals. Now, it probably doesn't apply as much in hockey, but also if the ball's down the other end, then you could be pretty bored for a while you wait for the ball to come down. So they set up this huge field and huge goals. It was sort of relative for adults, just to see how they would find it. And all of these adults who were playing were coaches, and this is, I guess, is what you can see that they set up for them. I guess looking at this, so Alistair Park provided us a bit of data on how many passes it might take to get up the field in an adult format. Whereas for kids, it takes a much greater number of passes to move the ball from defence to attack, which also means that as soon as there's an error in that chain of, say, 6 passes it might take, then you kind of end up playing a small-sided game in the middle of the field. So quite often you're not getting those opportunities to get a goal. And also it allows those kids who are maybe a little bit more physically developed. So at the age of around 11, you get some kids who are much greater, have much greater physical development. They might just dominate the format because there's so much space for them to move. So it kind of brings everyone back to the field, whereas it's a bit more of a skill-based format without too much of a reduction in the running load that you saw from our data. So yeah, I highly encourage you to try and check this video out. With some audio would be ideal. And it might give you a little snapshot into what the kids are kind of feeling like it is when they're playing. Mark, do you want me to jump back across
Yeah, sure, that'd be great, mate. Thank you.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so I can definitely see below we've got some great questions from quite a few people. I'll probably zigzag around. One of the questions was how much larger is the field than a normal adult field? I think it's about 40% larger full scale. I think it was something on those lines. Daniel?
Good question. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you exactly. I didn't run that study. I guess just the concept of it was quite interesting. And I reckon you're probably about right, Mark. I think if you look at physical development and physical attributes in terms of running and muscular power and stuff like that, they probably looked at something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just want to go through some of the questions we've got down the side. The first one I will go from the top, which is going to be a toughie to start off with, which is from Damien, which is what's the appetite for this format to become a standard or an option for a 5-6 cohort? I assume you mean in Hockey WA. I will, long story short, discuss what we're doing at the moment with our year 1, 2 and year 3, 4 program, which is a concept called Gold Sticks. What we're trying to do is basically across the board get an equal guide for this is how we suggest you play under 7s and under 9s hockey. Under 11s hockey, Daniel ran this meeting at Hockey WA, I believe, probably, what was it, about 4 or 5 months ago now?
Yeah, about 5 months ago, yeah.
Yeah, and he presented it to the whole of the Hockey WA board and management group, where the feedback and research was taken with great feedback and great thought. And there were discussions about how we can potentially support the development of athletes and players. One idea that was bandied around was to allow a transition to see how it works, pilot the Bs and C grades of playing small-sided games, whilst leaving the 5-6As with the full field and seeing how that transition works. At the moment, there are no set plans or discussions regarding this, but it's something that I'm very passionate about from my role in participation, that I would love to see more small-sided games from a retention and participation perspective, so that it keeps more people engaged in the game, which means there's more chance of people playing for longer hockey, a lot longer life of hockey, and enjoying the game a lot more through more touches, more shots on goal, more goalkeepers, as the research Daniel suggests. Great comment by Andy Miller, who said at a stage there was a suggestion raised by a hockey playing parent. There were a group of Minkies playing 8v8 and they turned it into a 4v4. The Gold Sticks program for the under 7s, under 9s will hopefully support clubs, regions, any group of schools potentially to run small-sided games. And that's all underpinned through our resource called the Core 4, which supports transitioning from learning hockey into small-sided games. Suggesting that there's a lot of positives about indoor hockey, which is a small-sided game in terms of their development. Again, any small-sided game is gonna support their development due to the touches on the ball, based on the engagement and opportunity to play. Very good question from Tamika. What could the impact be on the transition from getting people at, say, 5-6As, Bs, Cs, whatever grade, playing, if they move down to a small side of 7 or 9 aside, how could that potentially impact their capacity to play 11 aside? One bit of current research from FIFA, and we use FIFA as such as soccer or football, whichever way you go, is such a huge sport. And at the moment, they have a very much a guideline where they want to encourage 7 aside at this sort of age group, 8 aside at this sort of age group. So I simply look at the sports around us who modify the games at that age group and suggest that basically the transition is possible. If there's an opportunity for stronger players to potentially grow, due to the nature of hockey, you can get players doubling up in older age groups. So those players who need that access to those larger fields and those larger groups can potentially be supported through playing extra games at session. We can also support networks from a Hockey WA base where we can support that transition long term, if the opportunity ever came around. Just looking through some more good questions. Do you have any data that assists with when they should transition to full pitch and how we develop game sense for players in the next age group? One thing I will lead in terms of game sense is my response will be tune in next week because we have something directly relating to small-sided games and how it develops athletes and players, which is hosted by the Coaching Lab with Jack Rolfe, who I actually think is tuning in today. So regarding that one, I'm going to handball that one over to the expert for next week. Let's go through for a few more. Can you please tell us what the perception of the coaches and the parents was when this was proposed? Did this change with the data? I think as this was a one-off study in school-based, Daniel, it was a case where there weren't a great deal of parents or exposure. Is that correct?
Well, yes. However, at the same time, we modified all of our other sports as well. Particularly soccer went from full field into line with the community standard, which just shifted as well. So playing across field. And what else do we have? We're looking at modifications to rugby and Aussie rules football as we speak. Now, I didn't have much backlash. Actually, I didn't have any backlash. Other schools who were prepared for some backlash from parents because of the adjustments, they actually sent that FIFA video that we played just before, basically with an email saying we've made some adjustments to sport, and this is why we're doing it. And I believe from our follow-up meetings and conferences that it's been well received, and we are sticking with it as a PSA brand. We'll continue with this until something better comes along. But the perception was quite good.
And just a quick question for you, Daniel. Is it just the 5-6s that do the small-sided games, or was it the 7-8s and up? Or
now, so it's just 5-6s that we looked at this study, and it have really modified the size. However, when we have some lower grade games, the nature of what we do is, so sport is compulsory for pretty much all PSA schools, and there's actually a lot of modifications on the fly. So if one school has slightly less numbers on the day, or a slightly weaker group or something like that, they might just negotiate with another coach to actually make a smaller game. Or I think you even mentioned it before about some 8v8 games going to 4v4. Quite often teams that might have some subs might actually set up like a little soccer game, on a little small-sided soccer game, 2v2 on the side, so that those kids continue to be engaged. So it happens a lot. We're not, we're not constrained by a set of rules that, say, a community standard might follow. We definitely have a structure, but we are flexible within that structure. So we've definitely utilised it in slightly older age groups. Now, there is some talk, particularly Alistair Park and myself after this, to look at potentially a study that looks at a transition. So perhaps those year 7 to 9 kids, instead of playing half pitch, they could play 3/4 or something like that. So yeah, that's maybe in the works within the next few years, but that could be an option for transitioning to those older age groups. Perhaps under 15s and above might be full field, and anything in between is 3/4, and then these younger age groups, say under 12s, maybe a half pitch. But that's just me, just looking at our data. That's just our group of kids. But I can see its value just watching as a spectacle. It was fantastic to watch.
So I'll just tick over probably a few more comments. So just mentioned that there is pushback from small-sided hockey purely because it's not considered real hockey, which is understandable. I think this person is not necessarily agreeing with this statement, but what I would probably say in this case is, in terms of the hockey field and the video that we discussed earlier, having a small side of smaller numbers allows the game to be reduced in smaller chunks, which allows the game to be able to flow and allow them to learn the skills required in order to actually play full field hockey when they're at that capacity. If we have someone new into the game of hockey who's 9, 10 or 11 and has very rarely played the game, and they get put on the wing and they have the ball hit at them 4 or 5 times, get told to stay on the wing, and they trap one of the 4 balls and then go home after touching the ball once and being tackled once, they've had a poor experience of the game. And I think from a participation retention perspective, what we're trying to encourage is that those sort of people are the people who we need to get lots of touches of the ball so that their skills and abilities grow and their enjoyment of the sport grows a lot quicker. I think from a participation retention view, that's where my big passion is. There's also counter arguments, which is, for example, the under 12 state schools. At present, they currently play 11-a-side at national championships. So how do we support this? And how do we make sure that transitions so that these players can compete at that level? Devil's advocate, under 12s national championships is very important. It's a great experience for someone. But is it the be all and end all, or do we look at the bigger picture? I don't know the answer. I'm simply suggesting in this sort of situation, it's an opportunity for us to discuss within Hockey WA and with clubs and with regions what we feel is best for the development of players and the growth of participation in hockey in WA. Regarding the junior formats and adapting things, and whether Hockey Australia have been consulted, Hockey WA have rights to develop our programs the way we want to. For example, in Victoria, in Melbourne, up until under 19, all levels of hockey is male and females playing together. So there's no potential roadblocks in terms of that. We are able to drive our competition how we see fit. And at the moment, the competition group currently see the current format as the preferred option. So at the moment, we're in a system where this is what we're used to. Can we get change? Is it the best thing for the hockey? It's obviously something we need to discuss in the future if it's coming up regularly. I'll probably ask if there's any more other questions. There's some great comments, and obviously I'll make sure we keep these, and I will, to this group and everyone who's subscribed, I'll keep the chat and send an overview of everything so that we can obviously support our knowledge and actually refer to this in the future if we take this and work with coaches and clubs and go back to our regions in the future. So I'll give you, Dan, have you got anything else to touch on or add?
No, probably not. I mean, I think the data in our case spoke for itself, and just being there was, I don't know, I almost felt a bit proud to be a part of a change that I thought was quite significant. And to be honest, we often get comments about it's not real hockey, but for me, real hockey is not a defender waiting for the ball for 5 minutes or a goalkeeper sitting on the back of the goals. To me, a sport is what you make it, and you can make a sport. You can make a sport fun, and you can develop skills like any other thing you might try and learn in life by increasing the exposure. And I think within the same time period, on the same field, with the same squad of kids, we were able to do that, and that was a big win for us. So that's probably my final comment, Mark.
Yeah, that's great. Just a couple of topics about how we've got our friends from Singapore joining in with us today, who have just given some feedback on how they run it. So I look forward to hopefully touching base with them and I'll get some information. But what I do know is and I'll use the term, the systematic approach that FIFA use. They set, and UEFA and their regional bodies, they all set lines at under 11s, the field is this big, it is this number, and this is how we play. There are certain tweaks if a team had one player less or one player more to utilise those things. But I, as I said, in the under 7s and the under 9s, we are currently in the process of developing something for that. The 5-6 group, I think, is a great opportunity for us to actually discuss in these sorts of times where it could lead to and what could be done. and how we could potentially support it. There were suggestions from someone regarding the potential pilot of throwing it out at B grade, C grade to support those players to see how they enjoy the game more. And as Matt mentions just on the comments, it involves goalkeepers, and the growth and desire to be a goalkeeper will be much, much higher rather than standing in the cold, touching the ball once every 20, 25 minutes and then going home and calling that a day on a rotation. If we're sharing out goalkeeping responsibilities from a team, it then becomes a burden as to something that they can enjoy and try and it's fun because of those touches of the ball. So yeah. So what I will do is I'd like to firstly thank Daniel for his time today. The research and the time that he's given us is invaluable. It's a great start to and a great host to have for our first Coach Education Network session. I look forward to some feedback from you all. Feel free to send me an email that you went through the subscription email for feedback of anything you want to see in the future. If you've got any questions for Daniel, in the return email, I'm sure you won't mind me just dropping your email details.
Of course, yep.
And I will ensure that we send the link so you can hear the audio of the soccer reenactment for the size of the field so that we can get a real feel of what that means and what that suggests. So what I'll do again, thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate coaches, your support in terms of the program and where it's going for this inaugural Coach Education Network Session 1. I look forward to hosting Jack Rolfe in the Coaching Lab next week, 6:30 to 7:30 on small-sided games. Again, but actually integrated them into games and getting people playing. So apart from that, any questions, as I said, I'll send through the email. And thank you for your time.